on the Brownsfield project. Keith
Zebrin.
You have to see it to understand how difficult. And Kayla Patton is here also. She's with EPA out of the Seattle office. And they're going to be kind of going through what the Brownsfield project is, the overview of it, and then we'll have some input and some discussion basically from the community on some ideas of where we need to be focusing. So thanks for coming tonight. Keith?
All right, thanks. Everybody, thanks for coming. Like Betty said, I'm Keith Zebrin with Cardno. If we could go to the next slide. Kind of just give you a recap of exactly what we're going to cover. Is it going?
Try to enter.
I think there's a side button, no? These guys.
It's frozen.
Weird. Maybe it is. There we go.
Okay.
The click of the mouse. There we go. This is just kind of an outline of what we're going to talk about. The first thing we'll cover, and I'll bring Kayla up in a minute to talk about EPA's Brownfield program. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the current assessment grant. And SCOED was fortunate enough to win a Brownfield assessment grant as a coalition grant, which includes coalition members of Lake County, the city of Paisley, and the town of Lakeview as well. And by forming a coalition like that, actually doubling the potential, or doubling the value of the grant from $300,000 to $600,000 to accomplish what we'll be talking about tonight. We'll talk a little bit about, come on in. If you could sign in, and then we can.
Okay, thank you.
I'll give you 30 seconds or so, and we'll keep it rolling.
No, please continue.
No problem. And one point I'd like to make is, anytime we're in the presentation, if you got a question, raise your hand, speak up. And we want to make this as collaborative and transparent as possible. So after we talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the project, we'll talk a little bit about the schedule for the project and also the overall vision. And simplistically, the vision is to leverage future grants, private investment, et cetera, but we'll kind of go over those specifics. We'll talk about Oregon's Brownfield program, and also at the end, I want to open up the floor to all of you to provide some insight into ideas on how we can make the program a success, sites that can be assessed, to also redevelopment options, potential, et cetera. So, good. Next slide. And the next slide. What cover slides in here? Kayla, if you could just kind of.
So Kayla Patton with EPA out of the Seattle office, and I am the project manager for the SCOED grant. So I just interface with these fine ladies and provide any advice or anything that they might need. So the first question is, what is a brownfield? So this is our official definition from EPA, and so I'll read it. A brownfield site is defined as real property with the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of hazardous substances, etc. So the keys there are, basically the reuse is being hampered, and that's a real key to the Brownfields program, is that these are all properties that we want to redevelop and get back into use so that you guys can actually use the properties. And then there's either, there's contaminations or there's potential for contamination. And so often the process is, well, we don't know, we need to find out. And so that's where we start with the process. So these are typical brownfields type sites. We get these all the time. Gas stations are super common. Underground storage tanks with the gasoline and diesel. And there's those leak, especially really old ones. There's just various spills that happen. Junkyards have all sorts of stuff in them, so you can, drains, any of that might leach into the ground. There's just all sorts of types of potential contamination from those kind of sites. Hazardous substances are very clearly a contamination. It's amazing how many sites you find that have just drums of stuff, often unlabeled, so that's always fun when you kind of get to a site, not really sure what this is. So certainly potential contamination, and formal industrial properties, industrial processes that use all sorts of chemicals, and you just never know until you like really do your assessment if there's potentially contamination there.
Right.
So those are really common.
One thing I'd also like to point out, there are your non-traditional brownfields as well. I mean, blighted homes could have, potential asbestos, lead paint. You never know if somebody had a shop in their backyard, as an example. Old, similarly, old apartment complexes could be riddled with all types of different things. Done a bit of brownfield work on old mental hospital campuses, which have, laboratories, power plants, a whole slew of other different sources. So it's really important to kind of keep your mind open when you think about brownfields, because basically at the end of the day, it's any site that has the perceived presence of contamination and that perceived presence might be keeping the site from being reused, redeveloped.
What about meth houses?
Exactly,
Yeah,
that's
that's
a great example. Meth is called a regulated substance, right? Is that what it's called? Yeah. And so all the byproducts from that, I've come across a number of instances where those properties need to be cleaned up. And
Can do that in the brownfields.
right. Get the next slide. The objectives of brownfield redevelopment are really to return abandoned and underutilized sites to productive reuse. The public benefit is obviously to generate tax revenues, create jobs, combat sprawl, revitalize blighted areas, and address environmental justice issues. And the goal is really to recycle commercial and industrial properties into new uses. I mean, there are a number of examples where former industrial properties are now mixed-use developments, providing housing, jobs, shopping opportunities, etc. There's obviously a tie to sustainability, and the phrase from blight to right is kind of a term that's been bantered about in the brownfield world. So just a thought. These pictures, I'll just tell you a little bit about them. They're taken from a very small community called Hawkinsville, Georgia, where we're working, and small town, very similar to Lakeview, 1,500 people. It's just riddled with brownfield sites. And on the next slide, go to the next slide, Ginger. That site is actually an old mill that is now loft apartments, which are mixed income housing. So it's not necessarily low income, but there's maybe a 10 to 30%. I can't remember the exact number, which is low income, but the rest is mixed income housing. And the graphic above it is just kind of a schematic of how they reuse the building, and there's a new green space, etc. So it's kind of a neat reuse in a rural setting, much like here in Lake County. So just something to think about. I mean, we're looking at a number of sites, both here and in Paisley, that might be candidates for something like that. At the end of the day, the program is meant to support economic development. The last thing anybody wants to do is to generate a bunch of reports that are going to sit on a shelf somewhere. And although part of this project is generating phase 1, phase 2 assessment reports, cleanup plans, well, the goal is to take those documents, get them in the hands of developers to satisfy lending institutions, etc., so we can start turning some of these properties around. And there are tons of different statistics out there, like EPA has one statistic on their website, or had, it might be a little old, that for any brownfield that's cleaned up, the residential property values go up 4 to 5%, within a quarter mile. So just very, very slow but strategic process, and that's what we're kind of trying to do here. Like I said, lending institutions need due diligence documents in order to close loans, and I just kind of wanted to highlight one last time that the site doesn't actually have to be contaminated to be a brownfield. It's just the perception that there may be an environmental impact that is important. What's this program is meant to address. So, have the next slide.
So these are the different types of grants that the EPA gives out. SCOAD has an assessment grant, which is at the top there. And it's usually the beginning of the process. So with assessments, you have properties, and is it contaminated? We don't know. So you do various phases of assessments, and that's when you determine whether it is or is not contaminated. If it's not, you go right into redevelopment. That's fantastic. If it is, then you'll have to do some sort of cleanup prior to redevelopment. And so that would be the next step, would be the cleanup grants. That they could also apply for cleanup grants. And that would be now the actual cleaning up. So you've done the assessments, and now you're putting shovels in the ground and actually cleaning up the sites. The EPA also has state and tribal response programs, and those are for the states and tribes. It's an annual application for them, and they request a certain amount of money, and we help them develop programs to assess any brownfield sites in their area. The tribes tend to have a very localized presence. States are obviously their entire state. Oregon has them. I think almost every state has its own program, and so they'll strategically work on brownfield sites throughout their state. And certainly ODEQ works out in this area occasionally, so you guys will kind of see parts of that too. Targeted brownfields is an EPA program. If there's a community doesn't really need a full program to assess and clean up sites, they just have like a site that they need help with, they can come to EPA with an application and say, hey, we need some help with this one site, and EPA can potentially help with that. The two other ones, which are a little less site-specific, a little bit, job training. EPA has grants to help retrain community members in the environmental field. So that's not really cleaning up a site or anything, but it's developing the worker base that you guys might need to help do some of that cleanup. And then revolving loan grants. We have every 2 years provide funding to groups to send out low interest loans to help kind of spur the cleanup and get things going. So those are the 6. As I said, SCOAD has the assessment grant, which is our beginning of the process.
This is just a little more about the assessment grant, what can be done. As I mentioned, SCOAD's grant is for $600,000 because it's a coalition, but some of the items that can be completed are brownfield inventories, which to a great degree, the initial inventory was created as part of the application process, but there's brownfield outreach and community engagement, which is why we're here today. And phase 1 and phase 2 environmental assessments, and those are studies that look at the history of the properties, current and past uses, etc., to determine what recognized environmental conditions might be there, or areas that need to be investigated. It could be an underground tank, it could be some stained soil, it could be a chemical process, it could be a number of things. Asbestos and lead paint. And then phase 2 assessments are where you actually go out and do some testing to quantify it. And then of course we can do cleanup and reuse planning with part of the funding as well. And next slide. And the cleanup grants that are out there, up to $500,000. The new legislation came out this year that upped that amount to $500,000, which was kind of nice to see. And then the cleanup revolving loan fund, which Kayla mentioned, that's for a grant for up to $1 million for entities like SCOAD to lend out money to developers to do cleanup at low interest rates. There's also the opportunity to give sub-grants to nonprofits that are cleaning up sites as well. So that's something that comes up every 2 years in the grant cycle, and we're going to be talking about that as the year goes on, because the applications look to be due towards the end of the year. So, next slide. This is just a little statistic about the progress that EPA has made, or really the whole country's made, as a result of the EPA grant program. The grant program has been around since 95 or 96.
96, I think.
96, yeah. They started out with pilot assessment grants.
Yeah.
Which were a little different animal, kind of similar to the current assessment grant. Just some rough statistics, but, over 28,000 properties have been assessed by the program. Over 140,000 jobs have been leveraged from sites that have been cleaned up and repurposed. Over $26.8 billion have been leveraged from private entities to help revitalize not only sites but communities as well. And over 77,000 acres of property has been assessed and cleaned up. So, over, say, the last 20, 30 years, it's been a significant amount of work that's been done in this area, and it's a great opportunity for Lake County's GOED and the coalition partners to take advantage of it, the program. Slide.
So that's my contact information. If you pick up the packet of the slides, you'll have that. So like I said, I'm out of the Seattle office, and you are welcome to call me or contact me. But I will say that SCOED might be your first line, since they're going to be working more directly with you. I'm sort of advising them and helping them sort of on the grant side. But I can certainly answer any questions you guys have. Take note.
Thanks. And then next we'll kind of roll through the specific components. This is just an organization chart to let you guys know what the elements of the project are. SCOED is the lead agency. The coalition partners, like I said, are Lake County, Town of Lakeview, and City of Paisley. Betty is the project administrator for the grant, and Ginger, who's here in Lakeview, is the community liaison / coordinator. It's really probably the main point of contact here in the community. Go to the next slide. There's essentially 4 tasks to any assessment grant, at least the way that we see it. First is just the project management and reporting. As a federal program, there are a series of prescriptive reports that have to take place. There are quarterly reports, annual reports, closeout reports, and ongoing coordination with both EPA and ODEQ. We can talk a little bit about more of that as we go, but if we hit task 2. Public involvement is really key to the overall success of any brownfield program. It's important to engage the community and essentially ensure that not only the sites that are being assessed are in line with community vision, but also that there are redevelopment of those sites. You kind of refer to the little graphic. I mean, to a great degree, the 4 elements of any brownfield program are community involvement, assessing and cleaning up brownfields, leveraging funds, whether they're grant funds, or private funds, or public-private partnerships, and then lastly, brownfield redevelopment. It is kind of a cycle. When we get to our vision, you can see how that cycle can perpetuate itself, and we'll talk about that. Task 3. And essentially, this is the bulk of the work that's done, the site identification and assessment piece. Like I said, site inventory, a bulk of that's been done, but one of the reasons that we have these meetings is to get input from you folks with respect to any other sites that are in your neighborhood and that you cross paths with on the way to work every day. Say, hey, that site's not living up to its fullest potential. It may be environmental issues or stigma associated with that site is what's keeping it from being redeveloped. So what we've got here is brownfield nomination forms. So it's just one way of communicating that to Ginger and Betty. But in reality, I'm not a big fan of forms. So an email is just as well saying, hey, this is a site that you may want to consider. But that the forms kind of lay out the process, so you can grab one on your way out if you like. And at the end of the day, the goal is to do essentially 20 phase 1 assessments. And the phase 1 assessment is essentially the first step in understanding what the environmental status of a property is. So we basically complete inspection, historic research, regulatory research, and the interviews. And all that information is kind of boiled down into a document that states what the issues are with respect to environmental concerns. And then phase 2 assessments are when you're actually quantifying what the issues are by sampling soil, groundwater, asbestos, lead paint, any number of things. The phase 2 scopes can vary widely. I mean, a small site in a phase 2 may cost, $5,000 or $10,000, whereas a large phase 2 for a large site could be upwards of $70,000 or $80,000, rough numbers.
That's a small site.
A small site could be, okay, so you've got a dilapidated house and you're concerned that there might be asbestos or lead paint there. So you do an asbestos or lead paint survey, okay? And that may be even $2,000 or $3,000 effort, whereas a larger site could be, say, an old factory where they did degreasing, they did assembly, they did some plating. So you could have a number of different areas within that property that would have specific types of contamination. You could have metals contamination here, petroleum contamination here, solvents here. And sometimes they all mix together to clean themselves up, but that's very rare, but it does happen. It does. It's just kind of an incidental thing, but so it all depends. And one thing I wanted to point out is like, we might have a new participant.
Hey there.
Hey.
Sorry I'm late. I thought it was at 6:30.
Oh.
Is it at 6:30?
No, it's 6:06. But
Oh,
thank
I'm sorry.
You. And you can sign in your way out.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
We're about 60% or more through the formal presentation, but we'll be opening it up for questions, comments, and a little public participation piece. So yeah, that's kind of that. The phase 2 piece really varies. The next piece, or task 4, is cleanup and development planning. The goal is for this project, and these are initial goals, because it could be that we do, instead of 20 phase 1s, we do 16, but we do 10 phase 2s. I mean, it's a little in flux, and we keep EPA up to speed with respect to progress on a quarterly, well, almost weekly basis. So it's kind of a very cooperative process. So the goal would be to develop up to 8 cleanup reports, cleanup plans, which are technically called analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives reports. Basically look at the site, what the contaminants are, what the end use is going to be, and evaluate the technical aspects of the cleanup and the costs, etc. You can all, sir.
How do you know what the end use is going to be after it's cleaned up?
That's a great question. I think it varies from site to site. It may be that, let's say, you've got an old gas station on a corner, and you've got a hospital interested in putting in a clinic there. We've done that 3 or 4 times, mainly in the southeast. But so you would clean that site up to probably a commercial standard. So you would tailor your cleanup technologies to reach those goals. Whereas, say you had a site, and part of that site was going to be used for a daycare. Well, you're going to want to clean that site up to a much more stringent standard, because you're going to have kids roaming around in the yard, just simplistically. So it really depends, and the community vision kind of drives that, because you may have an old industrial site, but you don't want another, foundry to move in for some reason because it was stinky and gross and whatever. So you want to reuse that property for something more progressive, whether it's a mixed-use development or data center, whatever the use may be. So you would tailor your cleanup to that end use. And if you don't know, you can make it a little more open-ended. Another thing that we've done is use the grant money to do some initial concept development with respect to, this is just an example. There was an old gas station on that site, and there's a trail running by, and they wanted to build like a way station. So we did a concept landscape plan for that as part of the grant. It was like $3,000 or $4,000. So there's opportunity. Say we assess a large former industrial site, and we want to see how something like a grocery store would fit, or an apartment complex. Well, our planners can kind of play around with and do what they do, which is not what I do, and come up with some options. That vision can then be used to market the site to developers. Okay? So we hit the next slide. So this is what we've done so far. Sorry, there's a lot of words here, but we've done quality assurance project plan, which is kind of the overarching work plan for all of the technical work that's going to be done on the phase 2 side. We've had a kickoff meeting with ODQ and Kayla and talked a little bit about the goals and objectives. We've done a public involvement plan, which this meeting and future meetings are all covered in that plan. And then we've identified and secured access to 4 sites, and the phase 1 assessments are essentially complete. There's a little more work to be done on some of those reports, and we're also moving some of those sites to phase 2. And then we just got approval today from Kayla to move forward with phase 1 assessment of the Lakeview Lumber Mill site here in town. So I'll be inspecting that tomorrow. And really, I'm sorry if I heard something. And really the goal, one of the goals, like I said, is to identify other sites. This is just the start of things. I mean, we're probably, 15% into the overall budget, so there's a lot of work still to be done. So our goal is to get everything moving that forward. And of course, I already talked about developing cleanup and reuse plans. So you hit the next slide. And the next slide. I don't know why I put those divider slides in, but. So this is kind of the overall schedule. And I put the grant closeout first, just to give you an idea of when we have to be done with all this work. And that would be September 30th of 2021. And that's not, we don't want to have, dangling projects in place. We want to be done with all the technical work and be ready to technically close out or financially close out the work. So where we are now, the site selection period is ongoing. We started the phase 1s. So if we've done four so far, 1 more in the works. We've got another 15 or so to do. Community engagement is key. Like I said, today's our first community engagement meeting, and the goal is to probably have one every 6 months. We can compress that, we can expand it, whatever makes sense. So the next one will probably be sometime in October. We may want to do that sooner. As an example, if we were to help SCOA apply for a revolving loan fund, we would have to do a community engagement meeting sooner. So that may change the schedule. And obviously, whenever you've got multiple grant opportunities, you want to kind of roll everything into one set of meetings and optimize costs there. So, and one thing we'll be talking about, really not in just the last meeting, meeting 5, but throughout this, is other grant opportunities and kind of planning for the future. Next, the phase 2s, we should be starting in May. We've got a supplemental housing study that was in our work plan. The county's got an ongoing housing study that's funded through another entity. So we're waiting for that to be done, and then we're going to take a look at that and see how we can take things to the next level. So that'll be happening probably in November sometime. And it may be that we talk a little bit about that and use our next community engagement meeting to move that along. The reuse planning and the work plans. Really, as soon as we find a site or we complete a phase 2 and we identify a concern that needs cleanup, we can start putting those cleanup plans together and working with whether it's the owner or SCOED or city, the county, town, whoever, to kind of pull it together. And then, of course, the closeout report, it's not due until September 30th. I like to usually have them in a few months early, because that way it gives Kayla time to review and basically bless the progress of the grant. So, next slide. This is kind of the vision slide, although it's not very dynamic. I've been using the same graphic for a while to mix it up. But right now we're at the top bar, which is the Coalition Assessment Grant. And what I'm trying to show here is that, there's potential for cleanup grants, say $1 million over the next 2 years. Another assessment grant, which could be up to another $600,000. And then possibly a revolving loan fund grant, which we may want to ratchet that up into fiscal year 2020 as an example. And that's $1 million to do the cleanup within the community with developers and nonprofits. And EPA has a statistic, I don't think it's still on their website, but I like it, so you keep using it, that at one time it was stated that about $16.11 for every dollar spent in the grant program is leveraged in private funds. So it's feasible to take, say, this initial $3 million and change of initial grants and bringing potentially up to $50 million of private investment into the community. Now, some communities are a lot more successful than that and have brought in 4 times that, and others have, depending upon where they're located in the country, have been less. But at the end of the day, I think every community has reaped some benefit from this program and increased interest in whether it's an area of the community or a specific site. Okay, next slide. And next slide. Just quickly, one of the things I wanted to point out that in any state we work in, the goal is always to leverage the EPA grant program and the state of Oregon brownfield programs. As an example, there's an independent cleanup pathway program, a voluntary cleanup pathway program. Business Oregon has its own brownfield program, and there's actually a group that promotes the reuse of Oregon mill sites. So one of our goals is to work with all of those programs and make them aware of the sites here in Lake County and leverage as many opportunities as possible to move things forward. Next slide. Next slide. So here's where we get to the question and answer period, and also get some input from you guys as to really the top 2 bullets, identifying additional sites for assessment or discuss and reuse and development needs. In your opinion, what do you need here in Lakeview or out in the county? What are your thoughts on how this grant program and the overall brownfield program can move the community forward? Betty's going to be our scribe.
Yes.
She's got our trusty markers.
Yes, have markers, will travel, right? I've been doing a lot of that,
Yeah.
so.
So,
Really, what we are wanting input, we want to kind of have the vision of where the community would like to be. And as Keith mentioned, we can use part of these funds then to kind of do those visualizations to really help out, to help identify potential developers and other folks. Something similar to this has been done over in Klamath Falls, and one of the reasons that the Balsinger building is moving forward is because we did do some Brownsfield's assessment there and did kind of a conceptual drawing of what that site could look like. And now there is a developer who is coming in to do some potential mixed use. So a lot of this is really to not just identify the sites and clean them up, but also to be able to market the community itself. And we will be working with all sorts of resources to be able to help get the word out that we have that potential. So, but I don't want to presume to know all of the things that this community has in their mind of what they would like to see. And one of the sites that I think will be a prime site for potential redevelopment is the Lakeview, the one that is on the list now already to have the phase one done. And that's a very visual site, it's a very large site, and has a lot of potential. We have helped already, 4805 repair with a loan. We were able to make that loan because we were able to do a phase one to clear that the property was free for the financing side of things. So moving forward, we will also access the funding that is available through that way. So input is appropriate here. And
So you're looking for potential sites, is that what you're looking for?
we're looking for potential sites and also ideas of what the community needs to place, to put on those sites, both.
How about a mortuary?
A mortuary, okay. Is that a potential use, is what you're saying?
Potential cleanup.
Cleanup,
Potential cleanup?
okay. I've never had that on my list before.
Yeah. No, there's, different embalming fluids and,
Yes, yeah, okay.
if there was a crematorium there, there was a fuel source. So it's definitely a site that we can look at.
Wouldn't that fall under the perceived perception there probably a little bit too?
Exactly.
Right. Okay. Is there a contact that you could, refer us to, perhaps? You-
Sure.
You can fill the form out.
Oh, well.
Yeah, full format.
Any other sites?
Use your email.
Any sites within the community? I mean, part of this is, we've got the large industrial sites we know about, but are there other sites that are,
Don's Market, I think is what it's called.
what was,
Don's Market.
Don's
I'm not
Market, we have-
familiar
Yes.
We're working on it
yeah.
in the area.
How about 933 North Fourth?
What's that currently?
What is it?
It
What was the
was
last-
a machine shop.
What was the street name?
Fourth.
933 North Fourth. Yeah, we can look at that tomorrow, drive by.
Okay, great. It's a huge lot.
The old Napa building.
Okay.
No.
On
Fourth.
Fourth, across from Bloomers.
It's beside Bloomer.
Yeah, it's the red barn building right next to.
Somebody purchased the old Napa building.
Did they?
Did they have automotive repair in the back of that property?
Machine
No,
shop.
Machine shop.
Machine shop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or I'm probably not thinking of the same one then. The one I'm thinking about is right in front of Lakeview Auto Repair.
Yeah,
That's it. Yeah.
Oh, that's it. What about like in John's building? Is that?
How far is your
We're-
600,000 gonna go on
The-
the old
Or
mill
Hereford.
Yeah.
H-E-R-Y.
site? Oh, well.
H-E-R-Y.
Yeah, you got the oil tank.
Well, like phase one will be less than 10,000.
Yeah, we had.
Phase two will be, it's hard to say until we actually map it out.
What do you do for a phase one?
In phase one, there's 4 parts. There's a site inspection, historic research, interviews, and regulatory research. And
Okay.
all of that gets boiled down. The regulatory research is ODQ and EPA records that talk about previous releases, previous permits, hazardous waste generation, all that gets wrapped
What
in.
about Kogar's building and that big tank that goes right out into the highway?
That's the Hereford building, Don. It's down there.
We've got that on our list.
Okay.
Yep.
Good.
And the tank in the middle of the street, I
Right.
understand, yes.
We just need an overpass.
Oh, the Roundup Tavern.
Okay.
Oh, I have another one too. I don't remember what the name of it is, but it was the blacksmith shop. It's just right,
Oh, yeah.
right
Across.
behind Eagles Lodge.
What about
Behind
the
Eagle Eye.
delivery,
Mhm.
delivery station?
Yeah, that's what we're
Yeah.
talking
That's what we're talking about,
about.
yeah. I think that'd make a great brewery.
It would.
Right, oh, good. Yeah. One dead
So
end.
is there any cooperation with ODOT on these You mentioned the tanks. Are they
Don't
gonna,
know.
We haven't crossed that bridge
We
yet.
have,
but we will.
yeah, if we have, you know.
Would ODOT,
so not has
interested in
basically
something-
ignored all that.
Yeah.
They did their,
but do they care if it's not on the highway?
well, it has to be on the highway, right?
Right.
Oh,
Is that a state road or city road?
It's,
No, through the town, it's ODOT.
it's,
Yeah.
it is a state highway.
Yeah, okay.
So what kind of protection do the property owners get if they buy into this deal?
Great
From-
question, great question. So in order for any of this assessment work to be done, the current owners have to be fully aware of what the conditions of the assessment program are and sign an access agreement. And there's a couple strategies here, and I think the best one, if there's any concern about what you might find and kind of be left with, one option would be to start with the phase one, give access to that, that way you can understand what the potential concerns are, okay? And then we can sit down and meet and go over it like, okay, there's an underground storage tank here, there's an oil release here, and there was a plating line over here. Kind of extreme examples, but these are your potential exposures. And then, if, depending upon the owner's situation, whether it be a financial or family or whatever, then decide whether to go to phase two and start quantifying what those concerns are. And then the goal being, you know, once you start collecting data, if you do find, say, soil contamination or groundwater contamination in excess of the standard, it does have to be reported. And, you know, some people typically say, oh, then the clock starts ticking, and, you know, EPA is going to kind of come down on your ODQ. But my experience in working on sites that start the assessment process through the EPA program, it's a lot more cooperative process in dealing with how to come up with a solution. Now, there is always the potential for financial exposure, but at the same time, if you own a property that isn't living up to its fullest potential, here's an opportunity to take that to the next step. So really, it's a matter of weighing the options and the risks. And what we're here to do is kind of help you along that process.
I have another question.
Sure.
I bought a property here in Lakeview in 1987, and from Ford Land, and they came in and cleaned it up. Would there have been a record of that somewhere?
Potentially, hopefully.
possibly at state DEQ?
Yeah, probably a DEQ.
Before they could sell it, they wanted it cleaned up before they
Right.
could even sell it. And
Right.
I got some paperwork on it, I think somewhere, but I've sold it since
Okay.
and told them that I cleaned it up. And I got a call the other day of an environmental outfit wanted to know some more information on the property.
Mhm.
You know, just curious as to whether that would have been noted.
Well, I guess if this happened back in the 80s or before the 80s, the record keeping can be a bit sketchy. But if you've got any existing documentation on what occurred, that'd be a place to start to kind
Yeah.
of backtrack and figure out exactly what was done.
Okay.
But, and that's, you know, it's part of this whole assessment process, is really understanding the history of the site and the environmental history of the site. So that way you can kind of put the pieces together. And, you know, I've had instances where, you know, we've had a development authority, as an example, had a property that they wanted to sell. They had a phase one done, or they had an old phase one done by somebody else. And they said, well, could you come in and update this? And lo and behold, on a historic sandbore map, they're called, it's a fire insurance thing, we found a tank that was installed, you know, was present in the 1920s and it was still there. So there's a lot of things that kind of pop up along the way, but it's just about that whole process.
Sure.
So,
What about the Adams Service, Home Service Building?
Yeah.
With Evans?
Adams?
Adams.
That's on Lakeview,
I don't think it's under that
Number-
property.
pardon?
It's a separate property owner.
They own that property. This Williams family owns that
Did they
property.
buy that?
Yes, they
Okay.
did. The
That's that
2 acre
smaller
You're
square
talking about the 2 acre piece
Yeah,
on the
because it's a
front?
separate
on the
parcel.
fourth?
So what's
Yes.
actually included in the Lakeview lumber property?
Yes.
I said, what is?
Just the like, the 20-some acres and then that 2 acre piece.
And that 2 acres, it's an assemblage.
Yeah, so.
About Dan Michelson's location. He retired and he didn't buy it because of the oil tanks in the property.
Is that Michelson?
Yeah.
Mhm.
It was a guess or something.
He
Well,
was
there's
selling
several of those
cars.
that I don't know if they were ever cleaned up.
I wonder was it
The
used?
arrow wheeling.
There are tanks there.
Yeah.
Where, Darryl?
At Dan Michelson's. Oh.
What about where the Texaco station was, where Arrow Realty was? Were the
Those were,
tanks ever taken
those
out?
were supposedly those were taken care of. We need to, do research on those.
I don't know about that one, whether they were.
Old Arrow?
The
Arrow
Arrow Realty
Realty.
building over here was a Texaco gas station, had underground tanks, and at the time that Elise
Yeah.
purchased it and put it into Arrow, I guess
Tore
they
it down again.
Okay.
I'm waiting for it to.
will find out.
Well, if you're gonna
Are there
identify
any
gas stations-
residential areas or in areas that, you know, are kind of need to be
No,
looked
I
at?
didn't think about
They're
it.
numerous, but address specific, I don't think any of us really know.
There's quite a few houses that are, I don't know if they're contaminated, but they're certainly not very attractive or in very good shape.
So a potential asbestos,
There's some
There's some-
known meth houses,
okay?
Really?
yes, and I don't know the exact location of, you know, all of them. I know where there's a potential of one on, yeah, there's one right back here.
Oh, right.
You
Not
know,
the Elks Lodge.
The actual Elks Lodge itself?
Is that vacant? Or-
No,
Used to be a car dealership.
Oh, okay. It's funny, we just applied for a cleanup grant to knock down an old Elks Lodge in Mississippi. It's a really cool building, but it's gone, it just was exposed to the elements for so long that it's a health hazard. That it's riddled with asbestos and lead, so the goal is to just knock that down and turn the site into a park. So that's one other thing I kind of wanted to note, that, you know, brownfields can be repurposed into green space, parks, et cetera, too, so you don't have to necessarily put something there that's gonna generate anything. It could add to the, you know, just the overall landscape of the community.
So how much of the money can we spend on looking at alternate uses for the sites?
I'd have to take a look at the work plan, the number escapes me, but it's probably 10% of the overall grant. Yeah.
So,
We, excuse me.
so once, I mean, who's going to identify the 15 to 20 sites that are going to, I mean, if we come up with a list that's larger than that, who's going to prioritize which sites get done? I assume that part of that is access from the property owner.
Yeah, it depends on access from the property owner, but even beyond that, you know, we've been working with Ginger and Betty to kind of prioritize things. But one of the reasons we're all here tonight too is to talk about that. And as an example, if you see any of these sites or any of the sites that we've already talked about that you feel should rise to the top, then, you know, we'll obviously document that. Or if you have thoughts in the future, feel free to communicate.
We focused primarily on the old industrial sites that are very large parcels because they're very visible, very vacant, and could have potential reuse, so. But we haven't As far as if I'm not sure I could prioritize this at this point in time, other than I do believe the Hereford building is a prime
Right.
site within the downtown.
Yeah, I'd say
Just to-
that's probably next on the list, and the goal would be for us to put the eligibility form together, get that in front of
Well, and Don's Market is an eyesore. I mean, everybody that comes into town, I mean, it's
Yeah.
horrible.
We
Right.
know, we've tried to do that. We're not giving up, but
That's my question, is
So
what
does
when
it
you
have to be
don't
within the
have
town
compliance
limits?
by the owner or willingness?
We have to have that site
we have to have their
access.
permission.
Yeah.
We cannot force them to do anything.
And, you know, I've been working in this program since 2001, and in every community, you know, we come across an owner who initially isn't interested, but oftentimes by the end of the grant cycle, like, well, actually, yeah, could you do that? You know, so it comes back, and I think Ginger's efforts to kind of stay in front of these folks are gonna speak volumes and get us to where we need to be.
As an example of one, I don't know how many people spend much time in Klamath, but on South Sixth Street, there was an old chiropractor office that was vacant for years, that was right there near where some of the old mill sites had been. There was a perceived thought that there was contamination under that from the mill sites adjacent to that. They went through and they did the phase 1, they did the phase 2, they did some core samples and found out that it was fine. Now it is a medical office facility and for alternative medicines, and it is a very popular, you know, doctor's office right now, and it's right next to the Big Lots, you know, that area through there. And it was a great reuse of that facility. So that's the
Perfect
example of,
Yeah.
you know, if that, you can go see for yourself of something that has happened. And that place sat vacant for years because no one dared go near it. There was that perception. Wow.
I'd like to see a car wash here in town.
I think
Well, what, even putting the car wash on there, I mean, I'd be curious, you know.
As a potential
We do have a current
development need.
car wash, not in use.
right, that vacant, the one down off
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's definitely a site that,
car wash,
you know,
okay.
sure.
There's also the old tile shop
Oh, I
that
know,
I heard.
Laundromat.
back
the
right next to,
laundromat, because they used to do dry cleaning in there.
And the
White
laundromat,
shop?
yes.
Mhm.
And in between a hairdresser on
That's,
E Street,
On E Street.
I guess the back
Is
end
that
of the
vacant?
roof's completely fallen.
no, it's not vacant, but
In the
it's
alley.
having serious troubles,
Okay.
because they can't seem to keep the equipment going, and there's always backed up pipes
Sewer.
and
And
gas.
dry cleaners do, and they sometimes do trigger quite a bit of cleanup.
Yeah, and the
but
dry
they-
cleaning
yeah.
portion of that is not in use and hasn't been for some time. I don't know when that closed down, but the laundromat part of it is still
Sure.
trying to go. I mean, there's, stuff gets posted on Facebook often about, where's the owner?
Sure.
You know, everything's broken down, so, yeah.
Yeah, and it's sites like that, you know, have the potential to turn over sooner than later, that,
Mhm.
you know.
There's two I can think of, the old Linscomb paint shop down there.
Oh,
Sure,
that's
back
a
in the
good
day,
one.
they used to use lead paint, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
And probably the Leathers gas station south of town.
Well, I checked into that one, and they, when they closed it, they did all the right things with the
Did they?
DEQ to get the tanks
Cleaned up.
decommissioned or whatever they needed to do with them, so it's off the list. And they don't have any plans at this time to sell it.
Mhm.
It will probably just sit there for another 20
Yeah,
years.
all the way.
So, yeah, we did think of that one.
Yeah. Yeah, that was on the original list, actually,
Mhm.
so. And we talked about that today. We had another meeting just like this up in Paisley today, so.
So just, if I could, the Carlin, you listed the Carlin Mill, is that the one in Paisley?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay, and then the Lakeview Reclaimed Lumber? What is
That's
that?
the old
Wood grain.
wood grain.
Okay, so these sites don't have to be within the town limits?
No,
No.
it's countywide.
Okay.
It's
It's countywide.
countywide.
Anywhere in the county, actually, yes. If you have properties outside the town limits, that also we can look at those.
Okay.
What's that one right on 9th Street, you know, where you you're going south and then you turn right on 9. There's a,
The great-
Oh, the old Pepsi or Coors or something used to,
is it a
they had
house?
Pease Barbecue there briefly.
Yeah, right in there.
You mean the
I
one
don't-
on
Pepsi or
Ninth and
Coors, I never
Highway?
used it.
There's
Yeah.
not
Their
on the
house?
corner, but after you turn.
It's like an industrial shop.
Shop,
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, it would be a great one.
Mhm.
It's,
It's on the right-hand side?
you, I mean, you almost
Yeah.
don't even see it because you're so used to it being there.
So, shall I
What are we
just?
gonna call it?
I
Yeah.
think Pepsi was storing, or
It's just
Coors was
down.
storing.
Ninth
Stuff
Street
in there.
Industrial?
Ninth Street Industrial Building.
But there's one on the south side and there's one on the north
It's
side.
not on Ninth Street though, it would be on,
It's
yeah,
right
it
there
is on
across
Ninth
from the
Street,
house with the
excuse
picket
me.
fence, yeah.
I
What's that,
And the DMV, yeah.
With the highway.
Because there's a shop on the south
Mhm.
side.
Yeah.
And there's where the Coke or whatever it was on the north side.
Well, even that shop across from it too, I think.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So that's thinking,
Both of them.
there's 2 spots.
Southside Market site,
Oh, that's a good one.
that has
Ooh.
some potential.
Yes.
That-
Well, it
Did
has
it have
potential.
gas pump?
It has
It did.
potential to be turned down.
Yeah.
It did have gas the whole time.
Well,
Did it have gas on it?
It did.
I don't remember that.
somebody did close that thing up, right?
Yeah,
Like
I
a
don't
building?
know who owns it.
I know who owns it.
That someone
I
tried
can't think
to,
of their names, but I know how to find out. I mean, it's easy enough anyway.
yeah.
So if this is
That's a good
a
This is
good
great.
long list.
It is.
And, if we go through and kind of go through, anyone suggest if we need to come back to folks to kind of prioritize that, we can do that.
Yeah.
through-
I think some community input into the
Yeah.
prioritization process.
Right.
Absolutely.
Because this is a large list right now, and what we will do as our initial research is to see if, where they're at and who the ownership
Who the
is
owners are.
and things.
Yeah, we could
Yeah.
do some initial work, because and there wouldn't be a reason to prioritize it if the owners are not
They're
interested.
not
So
Right.
interested.
we could
Yeah.
come back together and do that.
Yeah, we can do that a lot sooner
Work
than
the
6
list.
months from now. We can do it in a few months or whatever the case may be.
But I do think that, I think we have identified the Hereford building as one that we probably will
Right.
move
Yeah.
forward on, and the others we'll just have to figure out on
Right.
as we go through. But this is a great list. And a lot of, like what we're saying is also then thinking, what would be the ideal reuse for that type of
Right.
property? I mean, it's not just cleaning it up, but, how can we get it back in the tax rolls? How can we create some economic opportunities
Well,
with that?
and with the Hereford building, this is the second year that it's on the
Endangered historic
endangered
sites.
buildings list, and they pretty much told us, that they being historic preservation, or not historic preservation, Restore Oregon, that if there wasn't a movement, we had difficulty the first year getting, what do I want to say? I'm trying to be good here. Getting cooperation from John to really start researching some options for planning or whatever. So we coasted through year one, and so in year two, if we were to pursue this and do the phase one and start looking at what the possibilities could be for the building, that would help the status to roll it into year three.
Well, if
Because
you-
we're eligible for some planning grants. They're not very much money if it stays in that status, but we have to do some work first.
He was very receptive to, maintaining the commercial use of the street level,
Right,
but that, and where the most work needs to be done is, of course,
right,
the third
exactly.
level as
Right.
housing.
Right,
Yeah.
And that would be a significant improvement in providing additional housing opportunities.
absolutely. Oh,
Exactly.
yeah. That's not been an issue. I think
So I
the
don't know why
use,
he,
figuring out the use would be good.
well, what I'm saying is I don't know why he would not be receptive to something that he's had in mind all
I don't
along
know
for the
either.
use of the building.
I don't know either.
Well, this is a good start, I think.
Great
and-
start.
And one of the things, like I said, when we come back, we start looking at these properties, we can do some, we've talked to a site selection consultant who is someone who can maybe advise on potential recruitment opportunities for what, matching what we have in this community with the potential of going out and marketing that property. That is also part of what we we can do a piece of
Right.
through this grant. And so it's not just going to be, this initial phase, but it will be, hopefully the next step will be identifying and really trying to work on the redevelopment side of things
Right.
too. So in your minds, kind of the idea of what would it look like if we had something else there, and it's not just vacant buildings.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and also, feel free to get the word out and talk to other folks, neighbors, friends about the program. And there's, over here, is this little document my company published, but it's got a pretty good summary of the different grant programs and some examples to kind of help, with that thought process. And then this is the nomination form, and this is a little flyer that kind of summarizes the goals and objectives of the grant, has our contact information on it. So really the goal is to take this program and continue to leverage EPA funds for another decade or more, and really take things to the next level. So
thanks.
feel free to take as much of that paper as you want, so I don't have to carry it back.
There's water and cookies.
Yeah, water and cookies. Feel
So,
free.
yeah, don't go home hungry.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much for being here.